Hi, this is Janet Fitch, and it is 5 o'clock on Wednesday, Pacific time, 8 o'clock Eastern, and whatever time you're coming from. Uh, I normally do this at noon on Wednesdays, but I had a family obligation I had to perform, so I performed it. And here we are. And Writing Wednesday is where I answer your writing questions, your craft questions, your literary questions, your business questions, um, whatever else might come up. Um, so if you have questions for me at today, put them in the chat. And if you have questions for me later or in between Writing Wednesdays, please write to me through my website, janetfitchwrites.com, and I can answer your question. And I have a cat that's yowling to go out, and so I'm going to let him out because I can't just let him yowl through Writing Wednesdays. Bye. You what? You should go out. Go do your thing. Go out. Go on. Bye bye. Okay. Well, so this is my real life. I'm right in the middle of it, and there's there's no cure for the human condition. There's going to be cats. There's going to be children. There's going to be leaf blowers and garbage trucks, and hopefully that's the worst of it. So anyway, welcome to Writing Wednesdays. And today, hi Marie, good to see you. Today I had a question about likability. You know, it's a big topic right now. I think in response to women getting sick of having to be so likable. Hi, Danny Dreadnought XK4QX. Nice to see you. Are you Danny? Um, and I think it's a question that's on people's minds because women are getting tired of um, having to be nice all the time just because we're women. Um, I don't know, guys, I'm sure, are, often in the same situation. Um, but women are definitely responding to that. And there is a movement on a very funny set of videos by a woman who, it's the We Do Not Care Club. It's the postmenopausal We Do Not Care Club, perimenopausal, postmenopausal. She's very funny if you run into her. But anyway, it's a movement. It's been going on for a while. It's like, why do women have to be likable? But it also meets up with an issue of a writing issue of, do protagonists always have to be likable? You know, it's something that you'll hear a lot in your writing workshops. If you're in workshop or you're in a program, you know, you'll hear from people who say, "Oh, your character is not likable. We don't want to read about them." Uh, and you run into it no matter what level of writing you're at. I don't find, you have a character who's, I have a character who's impatient, minor character. She's impatient. She's somebody who's trying to get an order in at a bar. And I had somebody who saw this. It's an early draft. It's a draft of something I'm working on. And I was she said that, I don't find this woman likable. She's hurrying the bartender, she's rapping on the bar, she's yelling out. And I think, oh, have you ever tried to get a drink in a noisy bar? It sure helps if you are a little more assertive than ladylike. Ladylike is you wait around until they overlook you about 40 times, and then maybe you'll get your order, or somebody more assertive will help you get your order in. And it's like, how likable do we need our characters to be? Well, it's a discussion. This is not, I don't have the magic answer to this one, because it's so specific to the character, the situation, the plot, the events of the book, the kind of character you need to make your action happen, because that I believe that plot is character. It's character under pressure. So if I have a character under pressure who is disagreeable and they're under pressure, doesn't that seem naturalistic? That they would be disagreeable, but it's giving them, they have to have room to change. They have to have room to gather themselves, or go the other way and become more disagreeable, or flip out, or eventually, experience the downside of their unlikability. Um, I do think that I can think of characters who are not intrinsically likable, but there's something about them that we like. And we'll follow them because that's a fascinating character. So I thought we'd talk a little bit today about what makes a character likable, what makes them relatable, what makes them somebody you want to follow, and what's the difference between an unlikable protagonist and an antagonist who is generally not likable and doesn't have to be. So I thought first we'd think a little bit about the likability or unlikability of protagonists. I find, hi Jill, good to see you. I find, reading Olive Kittredge by Elizabeth Strout is a well-known unlikable kind of character. She's very starchy. She gets involved with things that really are none of her business. She has quite strong feelings about the people in town and so forth. Uh, it's a series of stories that, in some way or another, are either tangentially or directly related to this character, a math teacher in a New England town, kind of rock ribbed New Englander, and not a conventionally likable character. But we're very interested in what she has to say, because um, she's internally consistent. She's a type. She has her feelings on stuff, and it's very interesting to see how she plays it off against other people. And while we often don't like her, we understand why she is the way she is, why she does what she does, and we come to accept her as somebody who can do good things, bad things, has a full life, can love, can experience profound loss, can yearn. So I think to have a character who's kind of starchy and disagreeable, but can show us other sides of themselves, allows you to use an unlikable protagonist and keep the reader with us. That is a watchable character, somebody you want to see go through their changes. But in other cases, I've certainly read books or started books where I just don't like anybody in the book. I think, they're all kind of selfish and awful in their own way. And you find maybe in humorous books you see that, and it's kind of interesting because the author is making fun of these people. When they're all kind of awful, it's like your mind has nowhere to rest. You don't want anybody to succeed. You don't care about any of them. And it's painful to read those books. It's just painful. There's nobody to root for. Um, it's not that it's a difficult person having trouble, with their lives, and you have hopes for them, and that maybe when they get clear of this situation they're in, they're going to realize something, and you hang in with somebody like that, especially if they have certain moments where they show a different side of themselves. Um, but when they're unremittingly awful for their own, I mean, they're fully realized characters, but they're awful for their own reasons, and we don't get much variation in their response to things. That's not a book that I'm going to keep going with. Maybe some people will. So this is a very personal thing between the author and the reader. But after a while, an unremittingly unlikable character protagonist who just doesn't show any vulnerability, any contradictions, any softer side to themselves, is not a book that I keep going with. I just don't have the patience for it. On the other hand, when you have a character who has no edge, has no unlikable characteristics, is just a great guy all along. I mean, it's like, who's that good? It kind of feels when you're eating too many sweets. It just makes your teeth hurt. You're dying to give them, a slice of something unlikable. Um, that maybe they're more, you can make them slightly more judgmental. You can make them slightly more, um, uh, unhappy in their situation. So they can still be a nice person, but everybody gets sick of something. Um, uh, you know, I mean, often it works the other way around for an antagonists, that you can make an antagonist more likable, and it makes the character more complex because you cannot completely dismiss them. I just saw the new movie Nuremberg, with uh, um, Russell Crowe playing Goering, and he does a really good job. You know, we would say making the person human, because there's much, 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 much to dislike. So that if you leaven it with a little bit of, oh, this is an actual person, this isn't a cartoon, it makes the reader's response more complex. And so the experience of reading the book is more interesting. Um, yeah, there are tons of unlikable characters in fiction that we can't wait to read more. I mean, there's been a lot of controversy about Lolita, um, as people more and more take that book, the morality of the book apart. But it's the writing that seduces the reader. And what we don't like is that we are seduced. So it makes a very complex experience. And the more mature you are to recognize that you've been seduced by this awful character, and implicated in, child seduction, child abduction, um, makes you think about it more. It's an arresting character. Uh, some characters are, they're just awful. They're so awful, they're funny. Like the father in The Brothers Karamazov. I mean, that guy is a nightmare. But you have to laugh, to see somebody disrupt a funeral like that of a saint. Um, so I'm trying to think of, there's such a range of reactions to this likability question. Um, but there's a consistency to a character like Olive Kittredge. She's like an antagonist. She doesn't change her character much, um, but she has a very complex internal life, and that allows us to identify with her. I mean, haven't we all kind of been stuck in the mud at some point and been really starchy when we didn't need to? So it's very interesting to observe that and think about that. Yeah, there's one book that I've been reading that just everybody is so stinking, and it's just getting worse. I had to get rid of it. There's kind of a dual a, a set of people, and you don't know who's the antagonist. They're antagonistic to each other, and they are antagonistic to, uh, it's sort of a toxic brew type of story. Um, but I just can't stick it because there's nobody that I really care about or want to see succeed in any way. What are some books that you have that have had that questionable protagonist? The antagonists are always unlikable in some way. And they get us sometimes when it's tweaked so that they have likable characteristics, like a Hannibal Lecter. He's seductive, he has likability. Parts of himself are very likable. He's observant, he dislikes hypocrites, which who doesn't? He's very clever, which is, it's always interesting. Um, and then you take but an unlikable protagonist rides an edge, and you can fall off that edge. Um, Character does things that hurt other people. The character, lies, cheats, and steals. Um, how far to take them before you lose the reader? And some people, it's not very far. I have this character who I've described as, actually somebody thinks that they're rather adorable. But what you see is somebody who's very assertive and asks for what she wants, um, and they thought that to tone her down so that she's sweeter. And I don't really. Does she need to be sweet? You know, it's how people work in a scene and how they work against the other characters. Um, but I kind of bristle, as many people do, when somebody tells you your characters are unlikable. And then part of you says, no, they're not. And part of you says, well, what if they are? It's like not everybody likes, maybe not everybody likes me or you or anybody. Actually, the bigger the personality, the more likely there are going to be people who won't like you. So does that mean you want to tone that character down so that, then you're just blanding out? but you don't want to lose the reader either. So it's just a conversation that writers have with each other, and we have with one another. Um, Danny says, my favorite novel is Coetzee's Disgrace. The protagonist is arrogant, bigoted, sexually opportunistic, and wholly self absorbed. And what I enjoy is his ability to introspect about those facts. Isn't that interesting? Roth is very much like that as well. Um, that these, I shouldn't say grumpy old men because they're not all old, but they're all Roth and they go off on these long rants. And yeah, so enjoying his ability to introspect about his own arrogance, bigotry, and sexual predation. And he gets kicked in the teeth, so then he has to really think about it. Uh, so it's set up as kind of a purgatory, isn't it? It's an interesting book. Um, who else is you know, um, I'm thinking about Rachel Kushner's last book, Creation Lake, and that is an unlikable protagonist. It's a woman who is, um, she's a like an undercover operative, and she is scoping out this kind of utopian commune to turn them over to the authorities eventually, or I believe it's the authorities. But she makes her way into the life of the commune, and she is a very unlikable person, very cold, and that's a trait of Rachel's work, is that the protagonist is often a very cold person. Um, so why are these books so interesting, and why are the characters so interesting? They are usually very competent at something. This spy is extremely competent, and so we're very interested in how she goes about the mechanics of her doing things. She's very lively intellectually, and she is looking into the revolutionary writings of this commune sort of father figure. Um, and she's very interested in processing new information. She's interested in the geology of the area and is able to absorb a lot of information that, of course, as readers, we're absorbing with her. So although we don't really like her, I don't care if she gets found out, I don't care if she gets run over or whatever her problem is, because I don't identify with her at all. She's not a good person at all. And yet she exposes us to interesting things, and she has interesting thoughts. So that redeems her. So Creation Lake. There is a book that I love, The Baudelaire Fractal by Lisa Robertson, about a young woman who is very arrogant. And yet there's a charm in her arrogance. I think it's because of the age at which she is depicted. Uh, I think a lot of modern fiction, the characters are not particularly likable. They're sad sacks like Steingart's super true sad love story, which is a comedic book. And so it has this sad sack guy who is trying to date a much younger woman who's way out of his league. And so he's not terribly likable, but we can identify with his loserism because we've all been there too. And that book worked very well. What other books can you think of with a an unlikable or somewhat unlikable protagonist? Memoirists have to be very careful not to bury their self-portrayal in too much fuzzy mist. I read this memoir about by Molly John Fast, uh, um, Erica Jong's daughter, about her mother's dementia and her husband's cancer and her family and her own kind of impatient, difficult self. And it's it's wonderfully it's wonderful to read because she reveals so much about her own limitations and her own, you know, bad thoughts, you know. I mean, you want to, that's why it's readable. You know, you can't be hero of your own story uh, if you're a memoirist. And you have to be careful about heroes in general. Um, and protagonists are often more, they have more in common with your reader than a hero does. You know, a protagonist in a thriller, you read it because you're interested in the action and the, you know, kicky punchy, you know, take over the plane and the plot and the villain and terrible villains and the scenery and stuff. Whereas in literary fiction, it's you know, watching the character's journey, and the character has to be realistic or we don't believe him. You know, nobody's that nice. Nobody's that bad either. Their villains can be that bad, but your protagonists are usually figuring it out. They don't have it out. They don't have it down. Um, you know, there's unlikable unlikability. You need some of it. It's like a seasoning, I think. You know, you need some of it, but as you add more and more and more, I think if you get to the point where they're 80% unlikable, 90% unlikable, 80% unlikable, that's where the reader's like, I don't care about this person. I hope they get shot. You know, I hope they get run over. I don't want to read about them. It is a fine line. You know, the kind of thing that redeems people is um, being afraid, being worried about another person, um, thinking their evil thoughts instead of doing them, um, not saying the thing that is on their mind that would really hurt the other person, even though they're thinking it. They don't go that next step. They don't say it, and that's very useful. Now let's see. I mean, most of the people in a Dennis Johnson book are bad, but they have redeeming qualities. Usually it's helplessness, you know, these sort of helpless young addicts that have fucked everything up royally, but they meant well, or they didn't mean to do the bad thing that they did, although it's a consequence of bad actions that they've been taking. They're generally hapless rather than actually intentionally cruel. Um, you look at, I'm reading a lot about Patricia Highsmith. I think that must be why this is on my mind. And her characters are horribly unlikable. They're criminals mostly, they're psychopaths almost always. Um, they're not likable, but we find them endearing. We find them like, you know, the talented Mr. Ripley, you know, we too have wanted to get ahead without necessarily paying the price. We too have thought that we weren't enough and have, you know, fudged about who we are to other people. because we're ashamed of who we actually are. It's a very common human feeling, and her compromised protagonists reflect a lot of that. So they carry our uneasiness about our own moral center and how we handle things. And that's very class oriented often, and the hatred of, these people for whom the path was already laid and they didn't have to do anything. Of course they're happy. Of course they're nice. You know, they never had to fight. Often reflect the underside of that. Um, and we respond to that, even though they're mostly horrible people. What else? Who else do you like? Let's see. Find protagonists, older protagonists in novels that are not comic novels, are more compromised often than young people. I mean, young people are either searching, legitimately trying, are legitimately depressed and not trying. Um, they're still full of hope. Getting an older person who, I mean, any book, the character is either absolutely unable to see their own process, like Pale Fire, or very aware of what's going on in them and just hanging on by thread, like Panine. Who else do we have who is questionable? Oh, so much good literature is like that. I'd say every Dennis Johnson book is like that. Um, people they're not blameless. They're not blameless. I mean, none of us is blameless. We've all hurt somebody. We've all been acted out on our, negativity. McCarthy, yeah. I was looking at a whole stack of McCarthy over there. Suttree, Blood Meridian, many McCarthy books have, you could say, tough characters or unlikable at times, as we all are unlikable at times. There's a wonderful book called Hausfrau, Hausfrau by, I can see her, what's her name? I've taught with her, wonderful writer. I'll find it for you. Hausfrau. Novel. Jill Esbaum. There we go. Got it. Which is about a woman who's having an adulterous affair. And she's very depressed. She's living in Switzerland and doesn't want to be there. She'd married a Swiss. And people who, they're depressed. They're living somewhere they don't want to live. They're living with someone they don't necessarily want to be with. And that is not necessarily a likable trait, But if there's something interesting about that they're getting at as they're trying to figure out their situation, how did I find myself in this? And what do I do to get out? And then they do stuff that's not helping. We've all had that experience, right? We've decided to, we found ourselves in a situation we don't want to be in, and then we just make it worse. That's likable. Even if the person isn't likable, we can feel pity for them and pity for ourselves when we get into those situations. I'm looking at the books. Unlikable. You get somebody like Henry Miller, those books, Tropic of Cancer, Capricorn, etc. I mean, that is a really unlikable guy. He's a user, he's a schmoozer, can I bum, 100 francs off of you and then not pay you back, show up at dinner time. But he's so freaking gleeful about it that you like him anyway. Those are wonderful books. Um, I am, let's see, who would I, what other books can I think of with that unlikable protagonist? Nevertheless, you continue to read it. I mean, sometimes the protagonist in The Unbearable Lightness of Being, the doctor, is a very selfish guy, and he's interesting, but he doesn't, um, but he's no hero, and yet he's drawn to somebody who takes life more seriously. He has two lovers, and we think he should be with the more lighthearted, sexy one that doesn't take things too heavily. But he actually is more attached to the heavy one, to the one who takes life very seriously and love very seriously. And he can't screw around with somebody like that. Um, and he has a choice of following one into exile out of communist Czechoslovakia, or staying with the other one. And he was a doctor, and he ends up, spoiler alert, doing something else, for those who haven't read it. Um, so, an unlikable person who is forced to kind of come to the crossroads and having to make some decisions about who they are. It gives them somewhere to go, you know. So that's interesting. That lighthearted thing. And what else? What other books do we? You guys are such good readers. Um, who tends to have an unlikable or questionable? Oh, Lydia Yuknovich is. I mean, the memoirists have gotten this down. The memoirists, because truth is their. That's what they deal in. They have to expose themselves and the unsavory things that uh, motivated them or that they reacted to, and in kind. Um, I'm always hesitant about a memoir where people are shitty and then they get clean and sober and suddenly everything is groovy. That kind of gets my back up, because I think that there's um, nobody's all, nothing gets to be hunky dory if you've been through all that stuff. Um, there's more to it than that. Other books. So anyway, I think it's always an interesting question. Like, how far do you follow an unlikable character before you just go, I don't care about this person. It's when they stop delighting you, when they stop having really interesting things to say about the world and how people are, or they're it's tedious, maybe sometimes, when they're just it's one note played in different scenes, and you never see any variation. They never come off it, and react in a different way or act in a different way, just to show you, just to open the door a little bit. That makes a big difference. And in your work, what do you say to people in workshop who say, your character is unlikable. I don't like them. I want you to make them more likable. It's, it's going to happen, and it's such a judgment call. And you might try it one way and just say, that's boring. I'm bored with that character. They're, it's, they've lost their spark for me that way. And you'll go back and put them back the way they were. I mean, I had that problem some with my, I think every character, every protagonist, but especially the punk rocker and the Russian poet, questions of likability, that they make decisions that the average person might not make. They might make a selfish decision where you wish they had made a selfless decision. Maybe they made a pragmatic decision rather than an idealistic um, one. But that's something that is true to them in the situation. You can't completely back down on that one. But some people go to great lengths to make you sit through unpleasant people, and everybody's unpleasant. And they they risk losing their reader. Sally Rooney, who's a great favorite at the moment, has to deal with this a lot because her characters are not always um, terrifically relatable or likable. The latest book, Intermezzo, I just love this book, and it's a two brother kind of book. One of the brothers is extremely likable, and he's in a relationship that both people are very likable. The other brother is kind of an arrogant jerk, and he's with one person who is a very likable woman, and the other one is questionable. She's young and she's kind of a bad girl, and she likes playing with this guy, and he likes it too. It's a very complex relationship that uh, I think having the sweet brother helps us hang in with the story, and the unlikable brother, who has a complex relationship with the sweet one. Um, and we play it out. We give him a chance because he's also in these relationships with these women who are really interesting. Um, so we give him the benefit of the doubt. If he was the protagonist and there was no brother, I don't know if I'd have stuck that out. Um, so anyway, I think we have come to an end to another Writing Wednesday. So think about likability as you're reading your books. We always do. I think subliminally go, do I even like this person? Do I want to read any more? I don't want to read this anymore. Um, I just don't like them, and I don't care, and I hope they all die. Um, or, oh, this person's horrible. Oh my God. And then you're turning, oh my God, this person's so awful, because it's still entertaining and it's still relatable. All right. Well, thank you very much for coming to Writing Wednesday. And I hope you write well and enjoy the holidays. Welcome if you're new. Please subscribe if you haven't subscribed, so that makes me feel like it's worth continuing doing this. And I'm usually at noon on Wednesdays, Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern, which I will return to next week. All right. Well, thank you very much. Okay, bye.